Officially begins the right time and the right attitude as we kick off this wonderful, wonderful week in the life of our church and the life of our community. And today, during the summer, we continue with our sermon series, Bad Church Experience. And we've been looking at some of our bad church experiences so that we can be aware and acknowledge the simple fact that it hinders people from participating in a faith community. In our Centralia community alone, 75% of the people who confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God do not regularly participate in a church. So, if we can look at some of our bad church experiences, we can prevent them, if you will, from happening again, and we can be a more welcoming faith community as we make the body of Christ stronger, healthier, and vibrant. And since we are about halfway through this sermon series, maybe I've had a lot of bad church experience, I think it's important to say, for every bad church experience, I have had 100 good church experiences. I mean, I just spent my entire life in church as my parents started my home church, which some of the youth are here today. I've spent my entire life in eating donuts after Sunday school, going to VBS, going to youth groups. I've spent my whole life being chased by the worship police, as I told you earlier. And I remember when I was old enough to sit without my parents in church. I mean, I love church camp. I love getting my first kiss around the campfire at church camp. My earliest best friends were in my church. Our youth group doing a big musical, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and I got to be Linus and suck my thumb and sing to my blanket. And the warm feeling I got every time I walked in and other people acknowledged reading the newspaper about some of my athletic accomplishments. I mean, I loved it. I couldn't wait till I was old enough to play on the men's basketball team and the men's softball team until we got kicked out of the church league. But those were some of my favorite things. I love red shirts. I love funny t-shirts. I love packing everything up into a stinking van and going to work camp and mission trips. I've learned how much better through my years. I learned how much better it felt to do something for someone else than it felt to do something for myself. And I even loved growing up in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ denomination. And no disrespect to others, but I love the fact that we say there is no creed but Jesus Christ. I love the fact that we say where Jesus speaks, we will speak. But where Jesus is silent, we are silent. I love how our denominations create space, if you will, to learn about God and the lives of the Holy Spirit. And we really don't tell people what they should and should not believe. It doesn't work for everyone, but it works for me. And even with a few bad church experiences, there are a million more great ones. And as I look back, I feel abundantly blessed that my parents deemed it necessary and thought it was important to raise me in a faith community. And then, as I got older, to allow me the freedom to stay in that community or to stay with my fellowship with Jesus Christ, or not, as I matured. Okay, my wife's shaking her head. Maybe not matured, but got older. And as I looked around, I couldn't put my finger on it. But what I learned that there were people who followed Jesus. Those who really had this spiritual aura, I would say, about them. Those people that were strong in their faith. They just seemed to have something that the other people didn't have. And I wanted some of that because it was just different. I mean, I don't know. I couldn't put my finger on it, but they just seemed more accepting. They just seemed more open and more loving and more caring. And they just seemed more genuine and sincere than some of the other people. So, what's the problem? I mean, what's the bad church experience in that? I began to notice that all the people of the church began to look the same. They began to think the same. They began to like the same type of things. I mean, they like the same type of worship. They like the same type of hymns. They like the same type of message that went from 17 minutes to 22 minutes. I hope I get in there somewhere. And it quickly became this sort of subculture. Even within the culture of the church, it became this kind of subculture. And you know, if you were like us, you were in. If you were not like us, then you were out. Because we had a way of doing stuff. I mean, have you ever heard? We don't do that we don't do it like that around here. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but when you show up, you know what to expect. I mean, so it's not a bad thing. It feels good and warm because you know what to expect. I could return to my home church, and I have, for their worship service, and besides the fact that it's almost empty, the service has not changed in 40 years. If you go away and the church is still there, you can return. And you can pick up exactly where you left off. And that's a good feeling when I walk in the door. It does feel good. But we create this subculture, even within the church, and we begin to feel that if we like one style of hymns, and if we like one instrument played in worship, that we like one type of dress or formality in worship, that everyone else in our church must like it too. But that's not the truth. I mean, if the church is only for people whose kids don't make the traveling baseball team or softball team, hey, look, we're okay. If this church is only for people who don't own lake houses and have a big boat, we're good, y'all. If this church is only for a clique of people who went to high school together, then there's no problem. These are the least of the people, but the fact remains that 75% of the people who aren't here or aren't in a church culture in our community. And the problem is, if God did something over 2,000 years ago that changed history forever, if God spoke a message to everyone, if Jesus was the Messiah who gave us a gospel to share with everyone, then a church culture becomes a problem. I mean, if the body of Christ, the local church, the local faith community was given a message of reconciliation, reconciliation simply means that things are all right with God. And let that soak in for a moment. I mean, when I lay down at night, things may not be right with my spouse. Things may not be right with my children. Things may not be right with my friends or my coworkers. Things may not be right between you and me when I lay down at night. But reconciliation means I'm right with God. So if the church has been given this message to share with the rest of the world, the worst thing we can do is keep people out. Keep people from hearing that message. I mean, if the message is for everyone, then the church should be for everyone. So even having a church subculture really is a problem. And I personally believe that there was a point in history where God said, do you want to know about love? Then look at my son. If you really want to know about forgiveness, then look at Jesus Christ. If you want to know about mercy and grace, then follow the ways of my son Jesus Christ. And this message was not just for me, but for everyone. And this subculture thing isn't new. It's been around from the beginning. I mean, especially in the church in Rome, as the Jews were saying, look, we're not eating what you Gentiles are eating. To be a Christian, to be right with God, you have to be Jewish first. You have to eat what we eat first. You've got to like the Jewish tunes. You've got to show our subculture. You've got to be a part of it. And the Gentiles were saying, well, look, we kind of heard from the disciples of Jesus, and we're not eating what you eat. I mean, and we're sure not down with that circumcision thing. Hey, look. I mean, the Jews are saying you have to be like us to be right with God, and the Gentiles are saying, oh, no, we don't. We don't have to be all right with you to be all right with God. So Paul writes this letter to the early church in Rome. And if you will, to address this issue, if you will turn with me to the 3rd chapter of the letter to the Romans, or the church in Rome, to Rome. And so Paul writes, but now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. Righteousness simply means to be right with God. And Paul is saying, look, I know this is new, but I didn't make this up. Okay, Jews, and we've been talking about this, and we've been seeing this coming. We've been reading about it in the Old Testament for centuries. This is nothing new. Okay, remember in SBS, Synagogue Bible School, we taught you this. Okay, it keeps going on to be right with God. The righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile. Did you notice something? Did Paul say behavior? No, he said believe. He said believe. And even today, if we feel or put a strong emphasis on behavior, then we do believe. I mean, Paul says being right with God comes from our belief, not our behavior. And it is for all who believe. And all means all. It means all. There is no difference. It doesn't matter if they baptize babies and we baptize older adults. It doesn't matter if you dunk and we sprinkle. It doesn't matter if you have a communion, you have communion Sunday, or you have it 3 times a year. The cosmos is not going to explode if we don't see a response after our prayer. He's saying it doesn't matter. He said there is no difference. Because, verse 23, he says, because for all have sinned, and all fall short of the glory of God. The common denominator that makes us all equal is that we've all sinned. I mean, God did something for everyone because every one of us needed something done for us because we couldn't do it ourselves. We have all fallen short of the glory, of the splendor, of the prestige, of the radiance, or the perfection of God. There is no difference between us. It's like, have you ever missed a plane? Have you ever made that bad dash, and when you get to your gate, there's no one at that little desk to scan your card, and you're like, oh my Lord, please. And you run down that alleyway, and once that little steward or stewardess shuts that door and it's back in that thing up, it doesn't matter if you were a second late, it doesn't matter if you were a minute late, it doesn't matter if you were an hour late. Once that door is shut, you're not getting on that plane. It is locked. And at that moment, it doesn't matter how late you are. You can't, people that come behind you, you can't say, look, I was only 30 seconds late. You were 5 minutes late. So both of you weren't on the same. We're all the same. We've all fallen short. We have all sinned. Verse 24, it says, and all are justified freely by His grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. Notice Paul says grace. We don't deserve it. He says redemption means someone took it back from you, and it came by Jesus Christ. Paul didn't tell me how they didn't get it right, because there is no difference. Because we all fall short. We're all late. The door has been shut. Verse 25. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of His blood to be reconciled by faith. He did this to demonstrate His righteousness, because in His forbearance He had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. So He did it to demonstrate His righteousness at the present time, so as to be just, and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus Christ. Paul says the only thing that is excluded in the church, later on he says, is boasting. So if the message of the church is for everyone, none of us can brag about it. And it's our mission to connect people with Jesus Christ's love. I mean, that's the mission of our faith community that we adopted some time ago. Then there are people in the community who want to hear this message. We have been in their homes. We have sat with them. We have broken bread and had coffee around their tables. They want to hear this message. And then why would we intentionally create a culture that would keep people away from hearing this message? Why would we say you're not doing it right? Why would we say we don't do that around here? Why would we create a culture that would lock anyone out when God says it doesn't matter how late you are, the door is unlocked and you are welcome to get on the plane? I mean, Paul's message in all his letters, the essential theme, if you will, is let's not make it hard for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Let us not create a subculture, if you will, of exclusion. Let us not be so stuck in our traditions. When people show up, they don't know what we believe because they are focused on how we act. Think about that. That's some good preaching there. I mean, if we're so stuck on our traditions, people show up, they don't know what we believe because we're focused on the way they act. Finally, I'd like to end. I'm almost at 22 minutes. Finally, my bad church experience. When I was touring with a band, I convinced one of my bandmates, if you will. We were in Memphis for 4 or 5 days, so I convinced him to come to church with me. I always would return. And this guy was an awesome, gifted, very talented musician. But he had never, ever, ever been in a church. Not once. Not for a wedding, not for a funeral. His parents were music professors at the University of Memphis. This guy had never been in a church. And it was where I began to become aware of our subculture. Because of his appearance, he was more than less welcome. He didn't know that he couldn't wear tattered jeans and a Van Halen t-shirt to church. When he came in and sat down, a nice little old lady came up and said, "Excuse me, sir, you're sitting in my seat." And he looked around, and no one was sitting around him at the time. And this is a nice old lady, I know her. And so he literally said, "Excuse me, ma'am, does it have your name on it?" And she said, "Well, Sonny, yes it does. It's right there." And sure enough, there's a little gold plaque. And somehow she donated that to you. Back in the day, it had her name on it. And if I was a betting man, I bet when she opened up her hymnal, it was donated by her. And then the organ music began to play. It was in the days when choirs used to have a processional in, if you remember. The choir began to come in, the organs blasting. The preacher, the ministers came in behind, and he turned to me and said, "This looks like a parade. Is the guy in the white in the KKK?" He had a robe on. And then it just got awkward from then on. I mean, he didn't know when to stand. He didn't know the Lord's Prayer. It wasn't printed in a bulletin or the set list, as he kept calling it. I mean, the entire service was filled with questions. I mean, he was bombarding me with questions. I mean, why do you stand when you bring in the money? Have you ever thought about that? Well, why do the microphones have so much reverb? This is killing me. Okay, he was a musician. Okay, he wanted to jump behind and mix the sound. And then the thing was, when is this going to end? Get me out of here. And like my friends, sometimes our church culture gets in the way of the message. He didn't hear anything. He didn't have the same experience I did of growing up in that loving, caring, faith community. And upon leaving, I will never forget the words he said to me. He said, "That was weird. That was weird. But I guess bad taste is not a sin. I guess bad taste is not a sin." Why do we make it so complicated? If the message is for everyone, we shouldn't dare create a culture where people focus on their behavior and miss this awesome message. And we don't always get it right. We make mistakes too. Faith community is filled with people that all have sinned. But we must be conscious. We must create an environment that says the message is for everyone. And our message is to echo that message throughout our entire community, despite ourselves sometimes. So let us begin today to allow our behavior to display our belief and not silence. Will you pray with me?